Um, uh, First of all, thank you for coming. Happy Sunday to all. I want you to understand that these are ideas, hypotheses, and a sort of thread of episodes that will hopefully bring us back to Villa Frere towards the end. However, I also want you to understand that although some of my, let's say, hypothesis and thread might sound slightly controversial, I would like you to know that all this is based on primary sources. This is not based on theories, this is based on primary sources, and not one source, but it's 2, 3, 4, and 5. Where we are not sure, I'm going to tell you. Now, the whole idea is we are talking about a very peculiar period in Maltese history. So peculiar that some people still try to, let's say, complain that it is tainted by the broad brush of colonialism. It's tainted by the idea that we over-glorify the Knights period, we tend to lambast the French period, and we tend then to turn into submissive colonial underlings in the early, let's say, in the early 19th century. I'm not going to debate that, but I want you, with the facts that we're going to be talking about, to get your own opinion, to get your own conclusions. Because one of the most important and beautiful things about history is that we have a brain to think with, and let's not be spoon-fed. Let's see the evidence, let's talk about what actually was happening, and let's try to balance out. Because history has different shades, and that's what we're trying to do today. Now, I'm sure that the sexy part of the lecture was Corsairs. And let's face it, they're colorful, they do things that we cannot do today. They were people who, at gunpoint, stole everything that they fancied and made other humans their property. So, you know, it's quite a fascinating thing. These guys went out on small ships, very small ships. So if you go to Marsa-Shlock, the largest Lutzu will be the perfect size for a Corsair ship, usually. So we're talking about the run-of-the-mills, not the let's say, the legends that there are in the Corsair stories. Small ships, 20 people, 30 men on a small craft, sail out of the Mediterranean to steal everything and anything that belonged to the enemies of their sovereign. Now, it's very, very, very important to understand that Malta had been doing this for possibly 1,000 years. So it's not easy to change your ways once you've been doing it for 1,000 years. The island was perfect for this kind of thing, strategically placed, and one very important thing, insularity. Insularity with regards to the politics, with regards to the food supply, with regards to how difficult it was to arm such a ship, but more importantly, it was far away from the main concerns of European politics so that they could do whatever the hell they wanted. And if the Pope got angry that they are getting a little bit too restless, don't worry, we'll find another flag and we'll use the flag of Monaco. And you'll capture a ship and the Turk will go, what's that flag? It's the flag of Monaco, but you're Maltese. Yeah, I know, but we're using the flag of Monaco. So how do I appeal this? Well, there's the Prince of Monaco, but he's at Versailles. How do I communicate with him? You need to go to Versailles. That's France, it's not Monaco. Yes, I know. So it's your problem. I'm dragging everything back to Malta, I'm selling it to my investors, and I'm going to make a quick buck. This system was in place on the island, and the whole of Europe knew about it, and the whole of Europe enjoyed using it. Today we're going to be talking about the British, we're going to be talking about the French. Both of them were doing that in Malta before 1798. The Royal Navy was here in the 1750s and the 1760s, recruiting Maltese men to do the same thing in the name of George III or George II. The French were doing the same thing, recruiting Maltese men to do that in the name of Royalist France, because we're just about to chop the head off of the king and turn it into a republic. But for now, we're talking about Royalist France. Let's start off with Royalist France. Now, we'll start off with one of the, let's say, ironies of it all. Frere de Grace Preville. He's a knight of St. John from Provence. Okay? Aristocrat who decided to delve into corsairing. And he actually joined the ship of a certain Giorgio Mitrovic, grandfather to Giorgio Mitrovic, who was politically active in the 19th century and probably was walking these same gardens that we walked today. Same guy who wrote to us, so that we can understand that during the period 1798 to 1800, 20,000 men and women died on the island. So we are at a prelude here for this period. 20,000 people. Get 1565, Second World War. Put together, that does not add up to 20,000. Just to put you into the picture, what was about to happen on the island. Frere de Grace Preville was on board a Corsair ship, fighting the Ottomans, stealing at gunpoint, enslaving people, bringing them to Malta and selling them with Giorgio Mitrovic, the grandfather of Giorgio Mitrovic, the politician. The same grandfather who was the godfather of Giorgio Mitrovic, the politician who was writing this history. The uncle of Giorgio Mitrovic, the son, the nephew, was also a Corsair, sailing in tandem with Preville, who would call himself Giacomo Mitrovic. In 1798, when the French came over, he decided that he's no longer Giacomo, he became Jacques Mitrovic, and he flew the flag of the tricolor, named his ship Vaubois, just to curry favor with the powers that be. And we'll get to him a little bit later on. But Frere Preville was also in France in 1798, in May 1798, according to Dr. Ganado and a lovely document that he published, where there is a possibility that our friend Vassalli was with Preville in Paris, trying to curry favor with the Directory to capture the lovely island of Malta because it was strategically placed. And on the island, a huge number of merchants were based here and helping out the, let's say, the center of commerce of Marseille. A lot of merchants. Leost, who would be the mayor of Zabouch in 1798 and murdered by the Zabougine and buried in his own garden because he refused to give them the keys to the armory so that they could arm themselves against the French. Fortunato Schwirep Isward, father of Nicolas Isward, the musician, another merchant. Pousselier, who had been here for around, the family had been here for 8 years, captain of the port, and a huge loaner of money to Grandmaster Hompesch, who would eventually win the election in 1797, and also someone who was tied to these men because he owed them so much money to be elected. Because if you get elected and you do too many promises to men with money, you're stuck with them and you can't go against their winds. Resonates a bit with today? We are not sure, and this is where I am not sure. We are told that Mikiel Anton Vassalli was in prison at Ricasoli. There is a possibility that Vassalli remained in Ricasoli and only got out of Ricasoli when Napoleon arrived. But there is also another theory that he would have been helped to escape Ricasoli and go to Paris, where he is listed, there's a spelling mistake, in the police report of the men from Malta who are in Paris. There is a possibility that he was there. But 100%, Preville was in Malta in June 1798. So from Paris, he returned. And I'll tell you all about him very soon. Derouan. Our own Vassalli knew who Derouan was. He wrote to him. He gave him also a proposal. A proposal to turn the island into a free port. And over there I'm showing you a very rare set. There are 4 of engravings commemorating. There are a couple of chairs here. Come along.
Apologies for coming in late.
No, don't worry, don't worry. Vassalli offered the idea to the order, no, don't worry, on a number of things. Create a Maltese lung, education, but turn the island into a free port. A free port, not at war with 3/4 of the Mediterranean. Excuse me. And these engravings commemorate the idea that actually Derouan made the island a free port. But he could not make it a free port for the Ottoman Empire because the raison d'etre of the order was perpetual war against Islam. It's not going to happen. But they were trying to do this. And this is where I start to become fascinated by the ideas of one man from Zabuch. 99% self-taught. These are ideas that the order was taking on, and these are beautiful engravings dedicated to Grandmaster Derouan with ships of different nations coming into Malta because now we are a free port. We want to accentuate the fact that we will trade. We are an emporium. We are a nation of shopkeepers. Venice, who would turn into dust within years, again because of the French Revolution. Great Britain, Holland, and the other engraving, because these are 4, is Denmark. Again, why am I showing you this? Because I want you to start to understand that this gentleman, Vassalli, had far-reaching ideas. And he had, although a huge love for his country, the ideas that he was proposing were hard truths. In a nation where it was evident that you could not be surviving with these ideas. You had to change with the times. Because up in France, it was revolution. It was democracy, if you can call it that. Because, let's face it, Napoleon and democracy do not go together. And we're going to get to that. Within a few months after Preville was in Paris, June 1798, today is the 4th. Yes, it's like in 2 days, the French fleet was going to be in front of Malta. The largest fleet ever assembled in the Mediterranean after Lepanto. So that is 200 years before. You have to go 200 years back to find something as large as the fleet that was in front of Malta. So let's face it, they were not going to put up any resistance. Why? Because Preville, same guy who was in Paris trying to curry favor with the Directory, was defending St. Julian's, where today we have exiles, and there's the tower over there, the French land, and Preville looks towards his soldiers, who were Maltese, and the Maltese are complaining, we don't have powder, we only have one shot, and our shot are leather pellets. What are we going to do? Don't worry, don't worry. As the French land, he goes and hugs every soldier, and he's showing his white handkerchief. Within moments, St. Julian's was in the hands of the French. To the south, a certain Angelo Calandri. He was originally from Rome, had been living in Malta since the 1780s, a Corsair himself. He was guiding the French troops through the south of Malta and where they are going to be landing and how easy it's going to be to capture the island. Pousselier, the captain of the harbor, his cousin was actually a minister in the Directory. Napoleon has said that on L'Orient, one of the largest ships which would blow up into smithereens within months at the Bay of Abu Qir in Egypt, was stepping on a list of letters written by Maltese who were begging the French to come here because the French were promising democracy. The French were promising, not like Derouan, to deny the Maltese a Maltese lung. The French were promising that the Maltese could run their own country within the larger framework of the French Revolution. Can you see this gentleman over here wearing a sash, a tricolor? I put this there for one particular reason, because there were Maltese so obsessed and in love with the idea of the French Revolution. Two of them were brothers, Segons, from Sanglia, who actually had a dockyard, a private dockyard, repairing ships, building ships. One of their younger brothers was a secretary on board a Corsair ship of Guglielmo Lorenzi. About him very, very soon. They were rich enough to send money to Paris so that they could literally finance the invasion of Great Britain by France. And so happy Napoleon was to meet them eventually that he allowed them the privilege to walk around not with a cockade, as you see this guy, but with a sash of tricolor, walking around the streets of Valletta, because you are so in love with the idea of the revolution that you were investing in the invasion of Great Britain. Not everybody was happy about it. Nota degli traditori della patria. Santa Teresa in Bormla, the church. One fine morning, this was nailed to the door. Giuseppe Mauren, head of the dockyard at the Arsenal in Birgu, where today we have the Maritime Museum. Vincenzo Caruana, Paolo Savona, Lanzon, Giovanni Dalli, Bruno, a medico, Nicola Randon, Gaetano De Bertis, ex-avvocato. Ex-avvocato because he was extremely corrupt. When Vaubois invited him over for dinner, he stole his silverware. Santuvella and Burelli, most of these guys were going to listen. They're going to let's say, feature heavily in our story. But it's 1798. The order has left. Hompesh has left. And the whole economy, which is corsairing, did not stop. It continued. The Maltese Corsairs simply put down the flag, which is that one over there, and raised the tricolor. You can see it over here. This is a white flag and the tricolor at the far end. It was either that or the tricolor, blue, white, and red. Ironically, the white represents the king, who got his head chopped off. But that's the irony of the French Revolution. It did some good things, but it didn't solve a lot. So these Corsairs decide, okay, no problem. Giacomo Mitrovic, guy with Preville, becomes Jacques Mitrovic, puts up the flag, sails out. But there's a big problem. We're talking about June, July, August. The Mediterranean is a French lake. The largest fleet assembled is controlling the Mediterranean. So the Maltese Corsairs have it easy. They sail out and capture the weaker ships, the Neapolitans, who had been providing us with food for around 500 years. Now we decide to attack them. Why? Because we can't be audacious enough, because the French have the Mediterranean. The Tunisians now become allies, because no longer we need food. We need food. We are an island of hunger. So Sicily, we are totally dependent on Sicily. COVID hits, Lidl has nothing on the shelves. We need to understand things don't change. We are still the same. We are still the same in the same situation. So if you're not getting anything from Sicily, you need to turn to Tunis, where the meat is cheaper, but the wheat is more expensive. But by August, in Abu Qir, the whole French fleet is at the bottom of the Mediterranean. Why? Because of Nelson and his band of brothers. So suddenly now, the Mediterranean is an English lake. And if we sail out with a tricolor, it's a bit of a problem. Because you have no one to protect you. So the tricolor loses its strength. If the knights were still here, as I told you in the beginning, if the Pope is angry and you cannot use the Maltese flag, you use the Monaco flag. At one point, the Maltese turned to the flag of Modena, landlocked, no sea. And we decided that there were a couple of people who knew the Uditore of the Grand Master, would be today technically the chief of staff at OPM. And he told the investors, I've got a good trick. Modena, because the Turks cannot go and appeal to Modena. You know, let's use Modena. Less taxes and more profits. But now, the French are here. What are you going to do? Change the flag? No, because the French are at war with everyone. So, these Corsairs have it bad. Their business is down in the dumps. Their investors are not getting any money in. But don't worry, we've got democracy. This is D'Angely. He's a very complicated figure. And I will do disservice to history if I try to explain this in the few minutes that we have. But this guy is essential to our story. Most probably, Vassalli was a very good friend of his. This guy was living in Valletta. So the plan was he was going to join Napoleon in Egypt. Fell sick, and so he stayed here. And Napoleon gave him a good position in the government. So we've got Vaubois, who controls the whole thing, and D'Angely as the commissioner of government. He's trying to change the system. He's trying to remove the aristocrats and the noblemen from the system that was in place by the order. So when, for example, all the wheat, the Università of wheat was bringing in the bread, technically the bread, from Sicily, led by mostly noblemen from Mdina, D'Angely said, no, I am a revolutionary, let's get people who are the common man to be in charge of this, to bring in the bread. He puts in his ward, his friend. Leost, his friend. And this causes an uproar. Why? Because the democracy that we call the French in Malta, the president was the ex-secretary of Home Pêche, Ranzija. That's not democracy. That's putting in power people you want to be in power. But we still have people in our historiography that try to tell us that the French brought democracy and we lost a great opportunity. The secretary was Dublé, a Frenchman living in Malta, yes, married to a Maltese lady, who was so interested in trying to defend the order that when news arrived that the French are on the shores, he went home and prepared some hot chocolate. I'm not just inventing this, this is actually in his biography. He wrote this. Even the secretaries, the members of government, De Bertis, the guy who was stealing silver, ex-avvocato, it was a bit of a, let's say, a dodgy kind of government. But I won't get into that. And D'Angeli was not happy with them. And D'Angeli, who had, let's say, he had far-reaching ideas. In fact, anybody suggested by D'Angeli was removed from any position. And Ranzijat was the guy who was always, signing this off. No, no. And here is a little link. At this point, Mikiel Anton Vassalli was asking for a position at university to teach there. And Ranzijat signs it off as no. Well, we don't know that he signed it off, no. But there was no answer. Vassalli, the same guy that Napoleon Bonaparte said, the finest mind that exists on the island, and Napoleon is France. He's still a general, okay? He's not a dictator yet. Very soon. And he's going to be involved. The same guy that's been told by the most brilliant leader of the French Revolution as the most brilliant mind of Malta is given nothing. In fact, he had to beg eventually the French authorities for bread. Again, this is the French government, we are told in historiography, that could have been a great opportunity for Malta. I'll let you be the judges. D'Angeli was becoming a bit of a nuisance and a problem. Ranzijat himself, who wrote the story about the siege of Malta, gave a number of reasons. And we've heard that, and sorry for the non-Maltese speakers, għax il-Franċiżi attakkaw il-Knisja, għalhekk qamu l-Maltin. Ranzijat, who was the president, so he knew a little bit what was going on, lists that as number 6 or number 7. One of them is this guy, D'Angeli. He was one of the reasons. Because he was a bit too avant-garde. He was a visionary. But he had to escape. And he escaped on board a Corsair ship painted black, led by Giuseppe Scolaro, who we are told, so Giuseppe Scolaro, small parenthesis, slave merchant, Corsair captain, Corsair investor, whose grandfather was a shipbuilder, paints his galley black to escape from Malta, to, let's say, slither through the British ships, go to Paris, first to tell France Malta is in revolution against the French, but also to take D'Angeli so that he could help General Bonaparte, or Bonaparte, the Corsican, to become first consul. And just to put you into the picture of what kind of, let's say, constitution a first consul had, was the same constitution that China has today. Give or take. Again, that's why sometimes we must admit that the French Revolution was a little bit of a failure. But let's not tell Macron that. This is, but that's another thing. This is the signature of the president. Look, Bozredon Ranzija. But why did he hate Vassalli? Why wasn't he giving him the position in university? I can't tell you. But, and there's a gentleman right here in front of me who did some very, very good research about a certain Panza Vecchia, who most probably was also visiting Villa Frere, who had the chance to interview Vassalli himself. Just imagine how beautiful that is. And he told him that he remembers that when he was in prison in 97, I think, when I told you that he was in Ricasoli, just before his trial, he was told not to give away names who were in the conspiracy to kill or to take over from the Rowan. Hompesh was involved and Ranzijat was involved. And most probably, and this is only a hypothesis, no actual evidence, when Vassalli was arrested is because he was a scapegoat to others who were much more powerful than him. And that will give us a clue to why Vassalli was being treated this way by the French, because the same president who was going to give him the position knew that Vassalli knew too much about how he was constantly changing his colors. But 1798, in September, in Mdina, the Maltese rose up in popular rebellion. I'm trying to be very diplomatic, and I will be, because I actually believe this. I believe that this was a civil war. It was not an us against them. It was not the Maltese against the French. So this is surely, from the evidence that we have, it's clear. We're not saying it was a 50-50 situation, but it never is. But a lot of the people in the countryside were against the French. I'll give you a couple of reasons. I won't go into it. Because in the countryside, we were growing cotton. In the countryside, you sell your cotton to the merchant in Valletta, and they'll sell it off, and they bring you in the profits. If you have something put aside, you invested in a Corsair ship or in a merchant ship. All the money goes to the harbor, and that money is invested so it flourishes into the Mediterranean. We are a nation of shopkeepers. Bring something from here, sell it off at a profit. With the French Navy not protecting our merchants, with the French Navy not protecting our Corsairs, we're going to die of hunger. And if we're hungry, and D'Angeli has added a couple of taxes, and if you have, let's say, you're renting out a land and you had a lease for 50 years, he decided, no, let's stop that, we need to redo it. So it was hurting the Maltese. And so they rose up in rebellion. Was it also because they knew that this democracy that was promised to them was simply just a fable and a bit of a joke? Possibly as well. Why? Why do I say this? Because in September, October, November, the Maltese created a parliament, a congress. The Maltese in Sigiwi, we are told, went to vote. We have their votes. We know to whom they gave their votes. And yes, there was one who got 2 votes or 1 vote. But these guys created a constitution. They had a standing army. They flew the red and white. And this is the irony of it all. Ideas which I am sure Mikiel Anton Vassalli could have thought of in previous years. But when he left Valletta, he was arrested as a Jacobin. And a Jacobin means a pro-Frenchman. We still say in our Maltese language, inti Jacobin. And it doesn't mean you're a lovely guy. And obviously, ironically, with this civil war, the Maltese went in search, and again, so when we talk about being colonial underlings, there are some traces there, but let me be very, very clear. Giorgio Mitrovic, the historian and the politician, and Vincenzo Braret, one of the leaders who was managing this battery, firing upon Manuel Island and Valletta, just up the road from here, got a Lutzu from Aura and went in search of the Royal Navy. We begged Nelson to come to Malta. He did not come because he was having an affair with the wife of the ambassador of Naples, and he went there to let's say, tick some boxes. But he sent aid to the Maltese. And he sent aid to the Maltese, and look at how interesting this is. He gave the Maltese captured French weapons because he knew that the Maltese were trained on French weapons under the Order of St. John, because the Order of St. John was buying stuff from France when it comes to military equipment. We're running out of time. 1799, Dom Mikiel Sherry, you know the story and all that. The monument, unfortunately, Dom Mikiel Sherry and the rest. But Dom Mikiel Sherry was the pen. The sword was another Corsair. Guglielmo Lorenzi from Corsica, just like Napoleon Bonaparte. Just to give you an idea of how treacherous the Civil War became. I'm not going to go into the details, it was a failed coup. They got arrested and captured. Sherry himself, you see him wearing the soutana, was arrested with a pistol under his soutana when he was trying to ring the bells of St. John as a signal. But we're not going to get into that. There's so much written and it's not for today. But just to give you an idea, these guys were captured and shot, not all together, one after the other. So every day, the Maltese in Valletta were seeing their compatriots being shot. In fact, a 16-year-old boy was shot. He did not die immediately, and the French soldiers over there ran to literally chop him up with bayonets before the priest went to give him his last rites. Small side note, most probably some of these soldiers were actually Maltese. Because another small fact, the first French casualties outside of Mdina killed by the Maltese were actually Maltese, wearing French uniforms. And that reminds us that this is, yes, a civil war. So, all this is happening. Lorenzi, Dom Mikiel Sherry are dead. Lines are drawn. This is going to be a drawn-out siege. And this guy, Gaetano Cavazza, this is a document from 1786, so it's around 10, 11 years earlier. This guy was an ardent French supporter. And so he decided, damn those who are against France outside of the harbor. I've got a ship. Something's wrong with this slide, sorry. But I've got a ship at Isla. Today, you'll find the place. They call it Taħt is-Sirena, just at the very edge. Where, and sorry, because you mentioned that there was a school by Mitrovic over there. And he went around and said, all right, who's with me? let's kick some Maltese butt. And he's Maltese. He went around the harbour getting money in the same system that had been done for centuries on the island, to arm a ship, to sail out of Valletta, to attack St. Paul's Bay, to attack Marsa Schlock, and to kill other Maltese. And this is the actual document, because this is business. So he went to the notary, same notary who would write a petition for Hompesh to return in 1802, but that's another thing. He went around getting money to arm his ship, because you need money. You need money for powder, you need money for food in a besieged city. And he was getting everybody involved. I'm not going to get into it because we're running out of time. But Dublé, the Secretary of Government, Ranzija, Isward, the son of Nicola Muscat, who was the uditore of the government. And interestingly enough, there were women investing in this ship. A certain Sacchet, Anna Sacchet, which the Fratelli Second, for example, I don't know, you can't see it here. Fratelli Second, same guys who were wearing that sash, giving him money. Because this is easier to see from here. This is Marianna Leost, whose brother had been killed in Zebuch. Anna Sacchet, and we'll see it because there is 1,000 scudi written. 1,000 scudi is a lot. A year's wage would be 50 scudi. Okay, Anna Sacchet decided to give this ship 1,000 scudi to sail out. The name was Le Républicain. It had a French flag, a statue of the Madonna on the front as well, ironically. They also had a British flag, just in case they put up if the English are close, they put it up. Unfortunately, Cavazza wrote this: E vi dico io mi trovo una bella somma di sotto, cioè di male spese adesso lascio alle vostre mani, fate voi altre quello che fate voi, altre ben fatto. After the first, let's say, cruise, it wasn't that profitable. Why? Because you were up against it. And he decided to revoke his command. And this brings me to a beautiful new discovery in our national collection. We have a diary. It's been quoted a number of times, but obviously people look at documents from different perspectives. This diary explains what this ship was doing. And it gives us the details of what they captured. They captured olives, firewood, which was quite important back then, and 4 Maltese sailors, who they could not enslave. You cannot sell them, which usually are the most profitable of your captures. Another time they captured another ship, it was empty, and the Maltese sailors jumped out of the sea, jumped off and swam to land. Another time, the fight was so bloody that he lost a number of men. And this time, it's a problem, because when you lose men, you need to pay their wives. And that's going to be expensive. So he gave up the whole idea, but in April 1799, the Republican fervor was still very strong in Malta, in the harbour. And Michele Cardona and Vincenzo Raffaelli decided to try their hand again. Again, some of the investors were Michele Picasso. We see him there signing under Guglielmo Lorenzi from a document from another period. Again, it wasn't a very successful, let's say, cruise. But why do I talk about it? Because I want you to understand that there was enough Republican fervor inside Malta to invest in this kind of money. Maybe it is desperate, maybe it is a last roll of the dice, but you still want to show that you are strong enough. But Cavaza was the same guy who sailed in when the Lorenzi plot was uncovered. Because he was a blockade runner. What is a blockade runner? It means that he is a man who gets a very fast ship, slither through Malta, go to get food, and come back. And when he arrived, Vaubois ordered all the bells to ring in celebration. And when those bells were ringing, it was the signal that Lorenzi and Dom Mikiel Sherry had to give to the Maltese outside so that they come into the city. And that's why everything failed. That's why Dom Mikiel Sherry was arrested under the rope that he was going to ring with the bells of St. John. We all know the story. By 1800, the French decided to surrender. And they only surrendered, and just to show you how, let's say, steadfast they were in their ideals, when the surrender was signed, and though I won't get into that because it was a disaster of a surrender, if there ever was, let's say, a travesty when it comes to Maltese history, is that the Maltese Congress was not at the signing of the surrender. Vaubois refused to deal with the Maltese outside. And let's say the British just wanted to get rid of the whole thing and said, okay, no problem, we'll sign it, which is, again, a travesty. When the British asked them, can you give us the keys to the granaries? Vaubois told them, yes, but trust me, there isn't even one sack of wheat left. Just to show you how desperate the situation was. Ranzija tells us that they were eating rats, and if you're ever caught in Valletta and you need to eat a rat, the best one, according to him, was at Old Bakery Street. That's where the largest rats were found. So those who were arming these ships against the Maltese, when the surrender was signed, they had to leave. They're not going to stay here. Vassalli, who was arrested, had to leave. He did not leave immediately because he had some things to settle with regards to notaries and business. They all ended up in Corsica, where Vassalli, along with a certain Fennec, were trying to propose to the French government, and eventually Vassalli became the head of the cotton industry of the French Empire. Look at this, what a brain, what a guy. He is in charge of the whole cotton industry of the French Empire. The whole idea was, let's try and grow cotton in Corsica. But why are they doing this? Because Napoleon could not drink a cup of coffee if it was not allowed by Great Britain. What am I saying? Because Napoleon could never understand the way the world works. It's the sea. Sugar from the Caribbean, coffee from Ethiopia, by then in South America, and Britain controlled the sea. There is no French fleet. Trafalgar destroyed, it was not Trafalgar that lost the let's say the Napoleonic Wars, because Waterloo was 1815. That's 10 years before. It's simply economics and money. And that's why the Maltese rose up in rebellion, not because they desecrated the church. We love the church, but we love our money a little bit more. And Napoleon was trying to grow coffee in Europe. That's why we drink chiqueira. because it's an alternative to coffee. And in Corsica, the whole idea of these refugees who were literally getting paychecks from the French, let's find an alternative, let's grow cotton. And they did try to grow cotton, but who's going to grow cotton? Giuseppe Scolaro, same guy who got D'Angeli to Paris, a sailor, a captain, a slave merchant, he's going to grow cotton. Angelo Calandri, Corsair, same guy who helped the French land in Malta. Michele Cardona, who was sailing out in 1799 against the French, against the Maltese. Michele Picasso, the most active Corsair in the last 20 years of the order's stay in Malta, whose wife, incidentally, was accused of having an affair with Giuseppe Scolaro, and they came to blows in a tavern in Senglea during the blockade, but that's another story. Laporte, who was another captain. Di Natale, so ardently French that when he returned to Malta, he had to run away back because they were going to kill him. Francesco Franceschi, another Corsair. The Sagons, who were giving money. And these guys were trying to grow cotton. And hence why, in hindsight, we know that it all failed. 83 of the around 300 to 400 who were in Corsica were sailors. So Scolaro became captain of the port as a thank you by D'Angeli for helping him make Napoleon first consul. Calandri is writing petitions because he could write and produces liqueurs, and all refused to serve in the navy, petrified of the idea of being captured and recognized as pro-French. But Vassalli did return. And so did this artist who drew this painting, Nicola Camilleri. You can see, you can't see it here, this is St. Elmo coming in, and the British ship coming in. We all know what happened. We all know that the Napoleonic Wars ended, and eventually most of these guys returned. Bruno, the same guy who we had in the Lista del Traditori della Patria, he returned. He was at Fontainebleau when Napoleon surrendered. A lot of these guys returned and slowly reintegrated. Vassalli did return, and he was probably in these gardens. And I want to have a full circle. That's why we need to be careful when we are talking about what was happening here. Yes, Malta became a colony, but Malta had a constitution, and Malta had offered the island up to Great Britain because they could afford the merchants and the cotton farmers a way out of misery from a sterile island. We're making money, and let's not beat about the bush. It is thanks to the missionary society that Maltese was so championed by the British, obviously to kick out Italian. It's obvious, they had a reason for doing it, but without that, there was no investment in Mikiel Anton Vassalli to start working on producing and translating the Bible into Maltese, for example. So I don't want to give you any answers. I want you to question the broad brushstrokes that we are usually told, because history, as you can see, is very, very complicated. And I only concentrated on Corsairs, let alone if we are able to see the bigger picture. Thank you for your attention. And do you have any questions? Any questions? Vive la France? No. Thank you so much. Thank you.